Hello and welcome to Church in Maine. This is the podcast that is at the intersection of faith and modern life. This is a podcast where we talk about religion and public affairs, and I'm Dennis Sanders, your host. I hope you had a good summer. It is now September, which always in my mind is a great thing in some ways because I love fall. My birthday is in fall in October, so I like this time of year, but it's also sad because it's getting cooler. And here in Minnesota, that means that winter is getting closer. And yeah, winter, Minnesota, you do the math. It's not fun. But for now, it is September. And sorry for the one episode during August. As I think I said in the prior episode, it was kind of a combination of of everyone being busy during August and me then being on vacation in late August. So with September here and everyone back at school or at work, you should expect to see more episodes coming down the pike, such as today's episode. And I'd like to actually start. I'd like to start by telling a story. My denomination, the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, has a seminarians conference, and when I was in, and I went to this when I was in seminary. It's always in the final year for the students. When I went back in the year 2000, it was held in Nashville. I don't know if it has changed, but it's probably still in Nashville. And the conference would bring in people from various parts of the denomination, really to introduce people to the denomination now, but as pastors, what resources are available for them to help them. And so we had a regional minister come in. This regional minister was from a nearby region, and he came in to talk about all the positions, the calls that were available throughout the region. And so I decided to ask him a question. And so I wanted to know, were there any part-time or bivocational positions available in Tennessee? Now, backstory, I had always had an interest in part-time or bivocational ministry. That regional minister looked at me as if I had had two heads. And one of those heads was speaking in Esperanto. He really did not know how to answer that question. And to me, looking back, this was an example of how, in many ways, mainline churches, and especially denominational bodies, really don't know how to process or handle part-time clergy openings. In his world, part-time clergy didn't exist because, well, why would they? The standard had always been that clergy work full-time. But has that always been the standard? And what happens when churches can't afford full-time clergy? Does that mean that the church is no longer viable? Mainline denominations have long assumed that all calls to ministry should be full-time. And if a pastor is working part-time, that's because the congregation is on a downward slope towards closure. But the thing is, the reality today is far different. Congregations are smaller. They don't have as large a budget as they used to. And so the setting is much more amenable for part-time clergy. However, many denominations, many congregations aren't ready for that change. So today I get to talk to G. Jeffrey MacDonald. He is the author of the book Part-Time is Plenty, Thriving Without Full-Time Clergy. Jeff is an ordained minister in the United Church of Christ. He has worked as a part-time clergy in several congregations. He's also a freelance journalist. He has written for the Christian Science Monitor, USA Today, Religion News Service, and many others. As I said, he is an interim minister, and he lives in New England. So, with that, let's give a listen to Jeffrey MacDonald. And I hope that, especially if you are um, a leader in I hope especially that if you are um, someone that is a leader in a congregation, someone that might be that works in a denominational office, whether that's a a synod or a region or a conference, that you'll listen, because basically the way that our church is, we are changing and changing rapidly, where part-time clergy will be an option, but it does not have to be a death knell for churches. So with that, let's listen to Jeffrey MacDonald. Well, Jeff, thank you for taking the time to chat this day to talk a little bit about part-time clergy.
Great. Yeah, no, glad to be here, Dennis. Thank you.
So I think the first question to kind of talk about is, when I started in actually even before I was ordained, I remember going to a an event from my denomination, the Disciples of Christ, and it was in Tennessee, and they had the regional minister at that time from Tennessee there, and he was talking about ministry and all the things that were available in his region and how great that was. And I remember asking him a question, and my question was simply, are there, any opportunities for kind of bivocational or part-time ministry? Because I think at that point I was already kind of thinking, did I want to do this in a bivocational way or not? And it was funny that the way that he responded, or at least looked at me at first, was as if I had two heads. He was just kind of shocked by that. Um, and that was 20 years ago. And I guess my question is, especially in light of what has happened, especially the last few years with COVID or anything, do you think that that view of part-time clergy, that was just one person's view, but has that view about part-time clergy changed?
Well, it's a great question, and I think that in many ways it has changed, but only in certain areas do we probably see that.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Really, it's a demographic, or it's a landscape that's in flux. I'd say, where we see more denominations accepting that part time is what congregations can afford. And so we see more and more judicatory kind of staffers recognizing that and working with it, even if they personally don't think that it's an ideal format, and they have not been exposed to many success stories within that format. Um, they are learning to open to it. So we do see more exploring of, okay, how can this work, and who's out there who has the ability to serve more than one congregation at once,
Mm-hmm.
or who can uh, balance their work with something else in life, whether it's raising children at home, or working in another uh, vocation. So I do think we see more examples, and I could talk in more detail about what I've seen in that if that'd be helpful. But I also want to add, though, that there's also resistance that lingers, and so and this is an important part of it as well, because, like, in the take the Episcopal Church for example, the Episcopal Church recently had a report come out where they said that 56% of their active clergy are not serving in one ministry setting. They're not full. I should Let me clarify that, not full time in one ministry setting. So
That's
Um,
amazing.
yeah, 56. And this is active. This is not including any retirees. This is active clergy. And so they're either serving multiple congregations or they're serving in more than one ministry site, like serving for the diocese and also in a parish, or they're working outside the church, or they're uh, doing something caregiving at home or something else besides their ministry. Um, and that's consistent with what we see in what I saw working in my book, that there were at that time 46% of congregations, Episcopal congregations, had no full-time clergy. So it's a norm, obviously a growing norm in that denomination. However, what I hear from folks that I interview on this is that the boards that are involved in examining candidates for ministry, or those who would like to be candidates, continue to make the message known that if you're not willing to give up another line of work, then you're not showing real commitment to ministry. And they use that as a litmus test. Now, this isn't everybody, but it happens on a regular basis, is what I'm told from those who are involved in that world in the Episcopal Church. So you have on a national level, it's a reality that more and more clergy are serving in this way, and yet the gatekeepers are still trying to hold to this standard as they try to figure out who's really got a calling from God. One of the tools they use is to say, well, are you willing to drop your nets and follow Jesus, like the disciples did? And the way they interpret that is leaving another line of work behind. And there are
But that
some of us here, and also in the Episcopal Church, who there's certainly many in the Episcopal Church who say we need to stop doing that. That's not a fair way to assess commitment. Uh, but it's a holdover from it's a cultural holdover. So so that's all to say that this is kind of a mixed bag. Yeah.
I mean, that's interesting because, talking about nets and all of that, I mean, we read in Acts that Paul, he did take up a side job, a side hustle, if you want to say, of tent making. So, I mean, it seems like I could counter with my own, biblical example to
Mhm.
their biblical example. That just seems astounding that people would use that to determine, you know, people's readiness for ministry.
Yeah, it's really interesting because you're right. There are those examples. There are Paul made tents, and his tent making was even before he became an apostle. That he was involved in that um, trade. So he brought a trade to it, and he didn't give it up. He told others to also be able to be self sufficient, so they wouldn't have to,
Hmm.
so they wouldn't be perceived as uh, telling people what they want to hear and then putting his hand out afterwards. Um, and likewise other disciples. Yes, Peter, the other disciples left their nets and followed him, but they continued fishing. If you read far enough into Acts,
Hmm.
you read that it wasn't like they never caught a fish again or did it for livelihood. Um, so yeah, it's really the legitimacy of the part time model is very well grounded in Scripture. It's also well grounded in the history of the church, where this has been the dominant norm across the centuries and continues to be the dominant norm across the world today. This you could very well make the argument that a this may be God's preferred model, or this may be at least a model that God is delighted to use in growing the church, and that this is there's a flexibility built into it. There's an adaptability to multiple cultures. And in today's culture, America has, according to the Freelancers Union in New York City, they say that there are 57 million Americans who work as freelancers. There's a huge
Hmm.
cohort, huge cadre of self-employed people. There are gig workers. There are people who work multiple jobs for multiple reasons that have to do with lifestyle, uh, family responsibilities. And so we're really in a time when work doesn't look the way it used to, where you'd have to say, well, if you're committed, you have to give up everything else and just be doing only this. This is your only form of income. That world is gone, and yet some of our mainline churches and some of the institutions are taking quite a while to accept that.
I probably should back up, and then this is kind of a two-part question, but one is to how would you define part-time clergy? And then two, how did full-time clergy, especially in mainline churches, become the model? Because it seems like that has very much been the standard, but how did that happen? And has that always been the case, or was that something that happened only in the last few decades?
Yeah, great question. Important question, Dennis. So, in defining part time, I'm referring to pastors who serve 35 or let's say 35 hours or less in one particular setting. So, I use this term. I initially started out talking about bivocational clergy when I did my
Hmm.
research for my book. And I found that that term was a bit too limiting because it didn't encompass those who serve part time in multiple parish settings or congregational settings.
Mm.
So, um, and yet, the, a congregation that shares its pastor with one or two other congregations is experiencing it as that's a part time pastorate. And and my book is focused on how do congregations make this work. So we needed to broaden the terminology to speak
Mm.
of part-time rather than bivocational, even though the church likes the euphemism of bivocational as because it gives a nod to one's calling can be more than church. But
Hmm.
um, anyway, that's where that comes from. Now, so that's how I define part-time ministry. And the the question the um, about how this became the norm, this became this has not been the norm, as we said, over the vast arc of history. There were times going back even to ancient times when um, the bishop Cyprian, for instance, back in the fourth century, uh, wanted to see dedicated priests in every parish. But even then, in the affluent area of Carthage, it was not feasible. It wasn't affordable. So they never realized the ideal then, and they never did for most of history. It wasn't until even when other groups like the Anglican Church in colonial days and the Congregational Church were both keen to have, thinking that that was an ideal to have one dedicated full time person in each setting. But even then, it was not feasible in most cases. So you often saw Anglican congregations sharing clergy and and coming up with other ways of empowering lay people in the absence of clergy. And so it really wasn't until the 19th century that this became more of a norm and got us to where in the late decades of the 19th century and the early decades of the 20th century were when we started to see that there was enough affluence. It was kind of a Gilded Age function that we saw enough affluence in enough local communities that they could start to do this and say, yeah, we're going to have our own pastor who works only for us and doesn't serve another church and doesn't serve another industry and is at is available to us anytime an emergency comes up, um, and that would become a norm. So it's really kind of a it's sort of a bourgeois uh, status that
Hmm.
became an assumed way that this is how you do church. This is how you have to do church. If you're going to be a legit church, an effective functioning church, you need to have at least one full-time pastor in that setting, if not more than one. And so we're kind of like uh, people who are looking in the rearview mirror, and we see one, two generations that got used to this, and then we say, well, that must be the way it always has been and the way it has to be. When in fact, it's really arguably more of an aberration. This norm, just like the post-war job, working in an assembly or a manufacturing plant. It was assumed for a couple decades coming out of World War II that's uh, the best way of work, that's the way work was going to go, that's what a good job is. You sign on at the plant and you stay there for your whole life. Um, well, that has proven to be an aberration too. And so, what we're just as the world is returning to a much more uh, traditional way of work, um, we likewise are doing the same in the church, I would say.
And here's another case where I think life intersects, because I my hometown is Flint, Michigan. Both my parents were auto workers, so very much that was the model, and especially post-war, um, people graduated high school and they spent a career working in, spent a lifetime working in one of the auto plants. But of course, that started to break down in the 80s. Um, and as a city, I think it was hard for them to come to terms with that fact that things were changing, um, and still wanting to believe in that old model. So, yeah, I can see where that the similarities are found.
Yeah, yeah, because there are benefits to it, and there
Hmm.
are benefits to having a full time pastor in a local church as well. People get used to it and appreciate that. Uh, Another kind of context we might see this in is just the evolution of economic expectations and the idea that as we progress as a society, we we rely on others, we rely on specialists to do more things for us. And so we aren't growing our own food as much as our ancestors did 100 years ago. Um, we might not even know how to butcher a chicken and or do the types of things that they would do to put food on the table, or to earn a living, or to make tools, or to make clothing, or to repair clothing. We don't do most of those things ourselves. There are some who still do those things, but it's uh, we've largely sort of thought, well, let's leave all that to the specialists who can do it on scale and who can do it more affordably and better than we can. And we'll all just specialize in our own thing. And that sensibility, when brought to the church, has led to dependency on full time clergy to be a little bit more knowledgeable and a little bit more expert in a vast array of things than everybody else in the congregation. They know a little bit more Bible, or maybe a lot more Bible, but they know more Bible. They know more history. They know more about conflict resolution. They know more about pastoral care um, and how to officiate a wedding and so on. Um, it's a very broad job description, and and yet you have to wonder. So, um, could there is this contributing to us becoming less capable as Christians, as disciples, because we don't minister to each other. We don't we don't catechize the children ourselves. We don't um, we don't know our lay people don't know the scriptures as well as they used to.
Hmm.
Uh, and how much of this is a function of depending too much on full time clergy to sort of have that wrapped up? Uh, how many parents are comfortable praying with their spouses and their children at home, um, being sort of the pastors of the household, if you will? Um, how many have lost that as well from this trend? And um, so there's a case to be made that what we're doing here is reverting to a model that has been proven to work, that is still proven to work. And that's why I write about a couple dozen examples in my book, those where it is working, where they're doing better. They have more vitality on a number of benchmarks than they did when they had full time clergy. And it's important to see that God is still working through this model and using it creatively, and that the muscles, the spiritual muscles that may have atrophied under uh, just kind of a drift into a consumeristic way of being Christian, those muscles are getting activated again and exercised, and people are discovering it's really very meaningful and rewarding to be part of something that expects more from them.
So in the book, which you've written, which I'm going to actually show up as Part Time is Plenty, you actually do a lot of going through different examples of churches that are thriving. Um, what are some what are some ways that they how are they thriving? What have you learned about what it means to be part time clergy, and how does that translate into a thriving church? Because I think, and you've talked about this in the book, that sometimes people tend to think that part time clergy is the kiss of death for a congregation. But it actually can be a step into actual renewal and rebirth.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And we are seeing that. That's when I went out to do this research with a grant from the BTS Center in Portland, Maine. They uh, gave me permission to go and find the churches that are thriving on at least two benchmarks. And the criteria that I looked for was, have they stabilized their finances after going to part time? And in all the churches I visited, they had. So they were not hemorrhaging cash. They had either they were either balancing their books or generating surplus, and pouring it into mission. The uh, and so that was one criterion. And then there were others where I was looking for those that showed at least one, if not more than one, in the areas of uh, greater engagement of their members, more participation rather than just sending a check once or twice a year and showing up, but being more engaged in the ministries. Having greater mission impact was another area I was looking for. A third was having more participation in worship and greater attendance at worship. Uh, and another was in stewardship and having more participation and commitment to that area of ministry. Um, so and that's what I found. I was able to find these in every region of the country, in every mainline denomination, all the major mainline denominations. I found them in rural, suburban, urban areas, uh, and I found them despite the warnings from a couple of the initial judicatories that I contacted, who told me you're not going to find any. Uh, they, they said my initial phone calls were making me think this might be a rather short research project, because I was being told that if you want to find thriving congregations with part-time clergy, you won't, because by definition they're not thriving. If they were thriving, they'd have full-time clergy. And and when I pressed on them to say why, they said, well, full-time clergy, or part excuse me part-time clergy only have time for preparing and leading worship and doing pastoral care with an aging congregation. That's all they have time for, and therefore these churches don't grow, they don't engage, they don't do mission, they sort of uh, wither, uh, and and certainly there are some that go down a path like that, but that's what made this interesting, was to find those that did not follow that model. They activated their people, and so we see. So when I visited churches, I saw places where the laity were much more engaged than they had been in things like in Kent, Washington, at St. Columba's Episcopal Church. There was I saw that the lay people had embraced uh, a a ministry housing the homeless once every quarter. So they were serving hospitality in that way. They had expanded their food pantry. They had planted gardens that the lay people were tending, so that the pantry was no longer just non-perishables. It had fresh produce. Um, they had a growing children's ministry, and all of this was because they had people who had attended megachurches and other settings, and they had felt like that sort of they had felt it was they were being given a very consumeristic religious experience. Come here, uh, and we'll have something for every age group, and we'll have music, and we'll do it all for you, and your job is to show up and do what we create for you, and drop some money in the pot, and that's what discipleship looks like. And these folks were saying, no, we want to be part of creating, we want to be part of designing, we want our ideas to be valued and our energy to be put in where we can really work on a more intimate level with one another. And so they embraced uniquely what these churches had to offer. And I saw things like that in other settings as well. Those are the types of things that uh, I can give you more examples, but that's kind of what when you ask what thriving looks like. Uh, it involves an engaged congregation doing creative things that people feel they have permission, so to speak, to do, that they often didn't feel they had permission to do in other churches, or in churches where a full-time pastor was orchestrating the congregational life.
And what is it, do you think, with a lot of middle judicatories that they tend to equate part time clergy with decline instead of with renewal?
Yeah. Well, so in some cases, they observe that what happens is a congregation will go from full time to part time unwittingly. They will do it as a last resort, and they won't really plan much, and they will sort of fall into it when they just get to a budgetary point and they say, you know what, we can't afford a full time pastor next year, so we just need to cut the job description and either offer that to our existing clergy person, or get someone who is going to accept that and wants to work in that framework. So they sometimes fall into it, and they do it um, in a way that, uh, having not planned much, they end up just sort of cutting off the things that they think they can do without, and so they kind of fulfill what that judicatory staffer was telling me about. They say, well, we've got to have someone lead the worship. We've got to have them here to do the sacraments on Sunday. We've got to have them visiting the sick and attending to pastoral care. And well, I guess we don't need presence on local nonprofit boards. I guess we don't need them attending ecumenical meetings, or taking part in community mission, or building relationships in town. And so they sort of lop off a chunk of the pastor's work. Um, and so, why do they start to uh, believe that this is associated with decline? Well, in some cases, a church will go down a path sort of like that, and will become rather insular and not have a lot of uh, significance in the community. They won't have much impact. They won't have much that draws new energy, and so they do go down a path of decline. And as judicatory folks observe that and don't really have uh, any alternative to offer to their people that they've had experience with, they say, well, I guess these two things are correlated. I guess uh, going part time is a contributor to decline, and so they sometimes will encourage churches to hold on to their full time clergy as long as they possibly can. But the problem with that is they do so without strategy.
Hmm.
They do so kind of blindly, and so they will sometimes even draw down their endowment to pay a full time clergy person leading a church that isn't energized and isn't uh, fueling new engagement, so they just run out of money, and then they change their staffing at that point. But at that point, they not only don't have money, they don't have people. Their people have drifted, their numbers have declined, or their faithful people may have held on for another 10 or 20 years, and now they're too elderly to have much energy to be effective partners with a part-time pastor. So you see, it becomes uh, a real problem when judicatory sort of blindly say hold on to your full time people as long as possible, because they're kind of sealing the fate that this church is going to um, not is going to be too far along by the time they pivot. The more visionary folks will say, um, look ahead and plan and go part time before you absolutely have to. Do it strategically. Do it in a gradient. Go from full time to three-quarter time, where the people may barely even notice. If they show up on Sunday and it looks a lot the same as they're used to, they may not even notice. Um, and yet you've just freed up resources and freed up the pastor to do some other things, and so that proactive approach can bear fruit. But judicatory are trying to learn these kinds of things, uh, but it requires a cultural shift, and it's taking time to get there.
Now, one of the things that I kind of hear you saying a lot is, in some ways, this is going to really require empowering the laity in a way that they haven't been before. In that, in the past, I think to use your term, and I agree with it, that it was more of a consumerist model, that someone just showed up and maybe they participate in a committee or two, but they didn't really have an active part in the ministry of a congregation. But what you're talking about here is really getting the laity to step up and doing some of the things that in the past it would have just been assumed the pastor would have done.
Yes, right, right. There is that is something that I saw a number of congregations doing, and one of the models that I discerned that we're seeing happen across denominations is a model of lifting up lay people, having the pastor kind of rethink his or her role to be not so much the provider of so many religious goods and services as a but more of a an equiper for the people, to equip them to minister to one another and to minister to their wider communities. And so it's a different skill set, really. The pastor isn't just the only one who can give a sermon. The pastor also uses their training to train others, to train lay people to give sermons. Likewise, with Bible study, they can spend less time leading all the Bible studies themselves and more time working with a small group of leaders who take turns leading Bible studies, or who lead multiple studies within the congregation. And so you'll see pastors. This is a model at Christ the King Lutheran out in Tacoma, Washington, where that pastor has, with the congregation, reinterpreted the role to do exactly what I've just described in those two examples, and in a few other areas. And so, what do you need for that to happen? You need lay people who are um, excited to share the ministry, excited to be part of proclaiming the gospel, building up faith, ministering to their neighbors, to one another, who really want to see conviction and new life in Christ to be flourishing among the people, uh, and and really see. So they're not just kind of coming to church to get fed or to get their fix of something. They're coming to church to give. They're coming to be practitioners as opposed to consumers. And I saw this in the other churches as well, that um, when they make that mental shift, when the lay people make the mental shift, they see themselves differently. So this is not just about, how do you stretch the pastor twice as wide on a part-time pay scale. This is how do we rethink what we're doing together in ministry, and how the role can be shared more widely. And and the people who are taking turns giving sermons, those who feel called to preach and are able to do that in these churches, are loving it. Those who, one church I visited has a dozen people who work through a cycle on the preaching. Um, they sign up, so the priest only preaches a few times a year, and otherwise you have lay people who follow the lectionary and who are serious about their craft, but they each bring their own style to it, and the congregation loves it. They say, we wouldn't want to go back to hearing the same person every week. That'd be so boring. They keep coming back to the same themes, and they I mean, which pastor doesn't have their own favorite themes that they keep trotting
Mm-hmm.
out, right? But and they say this is much more. That was a church that told me, if someone gave us $1 million, it wouldn't even occur to us to go back to having a full-time priest in the church. It wouldn't even occur to us, because that's not, we can think of, a dozen great things to do with $1 million, but they would have to do with mission and with outreach uh, and and other important priorities. So yeah, so so those are some of the things that, unfold with this, and it's really exciting to see. And I think it's very important to lift up these stories, obviously, because I wrote a book that does that. That's something I think is important, but I want to see many others doing the same, to lift up these stories. What does it look like? Why is it so
Mm-hmm.
rewarding? Who steps into these? And that's how you can encourage it for pastors who are listening to this and thinking, how can we do that in our church? How can we motivate people to take a different role if they're hesitant? Well, as they pastors can give space in the newsletter or in the worship service for witness, for lay people who have taken on ministries, to talk about how did they uh, gain the confidence, how is it rewarding to them, what difference do they see themselves making in the name of Christ as they do any number of things that used to be the pastor's job, and um, and let them do it in their own words, and that uh, film somebody for a minute or two and put it on the website that showcases this. Pastors can do a lot more to showcase what others are doing, and And that's exactly part of this like other skill set that part-time pastors need to have. It's discerning the gifts of laity, it's empowering, it's teaching, it's lifting them up, it's celebrating what they do, it's amplifying their work. Those are not so crucial when you're a full-time pastor, but they are part of the bread and butter for part-timers who succeed in this. And um, and so it's important to keep our eye on that.
So, um, I know you wanted to kind of be aware of the time, but I wanted to kind of close this out because to talk a little bit about your own journey, because you have I think part of the reason, obviously this is an important thing to you, but it's also your own journey as someone who is a part-time clergy. And I'd love to kind of to share with the audience your own story and how that congregation that you're a part of has changed.
Yeah, sure. Yes, I have been a reporter for 30 years. And along the way, I went back to school. And so I got an MDiv and I got ordained. That's now a little more than 20 years ago that I finished school and was ordained in the United Church of Christ. And, and for me, the I didn't want to give up journalism. I wanted to find
Hmm.
some very new and different ways of doing it rather than being full time on a newspaper staff. Uh, and and yet I didn't want to give it up altogether. And so I um, was really excited to find that I could do this, that I could serve part time in a parish and do freelance journalism during the week. That wasn't even something anybody talked with me about during divinity school, um, but when I finally started putting my hat in the ring, that's what the judicatory were saying. They said, "Well, we do have a part-time setting." I said, "Wow, really? I can do that?" Um, and so I jumped at the chance, and that's what I've done along the way. Um, so so I'm one of these people who's part-time by choice. That turns out in the United Church of Canada, they've been doing research on this, and they find that the majority are part-time by choice in
Hmm.
Canada. Yeah, those who ask these kinds of questions learn some interesting things. We're just our denominations are not asking enough questions.
No, they are not.
They don't seem to show enough interest in this area. You ask them how many of your congregations have part-time clergy, and a lot of denominations can't answer that question. Why? That's if it's a different type of ministry that requires a different skill set and just requires kind of a different way of looking at it. Why don't we even know how many are are in this endeavor? It shows a lack of appreciation for what this ministry is and what it can be and where these churches are. So that's a little aside. But you were asking about my experience, and I do this work. I'm a journalist. I'm a church consultant, and I am a pastor of a small congregational church. I currently serve part time in Kensington, New Hampshire, uh, the church there. And before that, up until about 2 years ago, I'm an interim in Kensington, I should say that. So I'm helping them embrace this part time model. And before that, I was in Newbury, Massachusetts, where, like in Newbury, we had uh, a mission emerge in the area of a food pantry that came to us that was just another church was closing, a Methodist church was closing in the area, and they said we serve 4 or 5 people a week, and we just don't want to turn them away. Would you allow them to come here and get some food from your closet? And that church at first said no, we don't have room, and I was one of a couple people who lobbied for it and said, I think we do have room in this big building that doesn't have that many people. Um, and, uh, and, and so they agreed, and it just took off once they got used to it by having other congregations take part. It was one of these things that they couldn't have done it alone, but they had it grew to have. Now there's over 10,000 pounds of food given out a month at this. The community has pitched in, raised more than $300,000 to build a building, so there could be a separate housing space right there on site. Um, it's just amazing what they've done, but they haven't done it by themselves. They just opened the door and then they said, "We'll have both other churches and secular nonprofits can bring volunteers, and we can, um, with that kind of volunteer force, we can do this." And so they've really met a profound need, and and those are the kinds of things that when you don't have staff to kind of do it for you, but you open the door and you say, "Hey, we've got a chance to feed hungry people," and as soon as we start doing it, they start showing up. Um, and you can see the impact that you're having. People get really excited, and the community has really rallied behind it. So those are some of the things I've seen in my ministry that I've been blessed to see, um, and it's very rewarding. It takes a little time and patience, but it's very rewarding when you see uh, lay people spread their wings and do what they're passionate, what they're called to do. Um, it's just a very rewarding arena to minister in.
Well, in final kind of question here is, I want to imagine if someone is, let's say, a leader in a middle judicatory, a synod or a conference, or they're maybe the president or moderator of their congregation, and they're in a strait where they may need to consider that they can't afford a full-time clergy anymore. What would you tell them if they are considering going to part-time? How would you encourage them to take this step?
Yeah, uh, I would encourage them to look at it, and if possible, to plan for it. It's not always possible. Sometimes it just happens, and that's okay. You can do a lot to learn while you're doing it. But if you can plan for it, plan a year or a year and a half ahead, then um, you can look at the opportunities within it, and to really experience. Or if you're doing it from, let's say you fall into it, which is how most churches end up there, um, and they realize, oh, we've got to do this right away. I would encourage them to take a little step back and take stock of what you're there to do, uh, where you have lifeblood coming. Where is the lifeblood that you're seeing in your community? Where is so when you think of the energy in your church, and where it's getting an outlet, how it's flowing, this lifeblood of God is flowing into areas where people have outlets for their passion, their creativity, their energy. Where do you see that happening, and how can the pastorate be designed to support that, to support the gifts of the laity, so that you take some stock of um, what are your what kind of gifts do the lay people bring? If you have a number of people in the church, a lot of churches have teachers in their ranks. Teachers are very used to speaking in front of people. If you
Mm-hmm.
can speak in front of 30 eighth graders, then you can probably handle speaking in front of that many people in a congregation on a Sunday. Um, so um, and yet a lot of people are afraid of public speaking. So look to your teachers. Do some of your teachers have the ability to give a sermon? I bet they do. Uh, do they feel called to do it? Very, very possibly they do. What kind of training or equipping do they need? Um, and now you're already beginning to build some of those supports. How about, do you have any nurses in your congregation? Could they possibly be part of a visitation group, uh, or helping care for the sick, helping attend to the needs of the sick? Um, they very well might feel that way, and it doesn't have to be even just applying their professional experiences and skills. There's people who are uh, have a desire to minister and abilities to do so, that just use a different side of their brain than they get to use at work, and and the church can provide that outlet. So you're looking at it as you're almost kind of rethinking the pastorate and saying, what does the pastor do that's helping support lifeblood today, and how could that be redistributed among the congregation? And if we think strategically, we might say that some of those assets within the congregation can be um, set loose and lifted up and supported. And we might also have the pastor then have some new freedom. This is a counterintuitive thing to say, how could the pastor be more available to the community after going part time? We wouldn't think so. We might say, oh, no, we can't have them out in the community at all. They have to spend all their time on us because we don't have much time with them anyway. Actually, that's not true. When you strategically rethink how ministry gets done,
Mm-hmm.
and you have more folks taking part in it, now you can send the pastor to build those relationships that actually actively stoke the lifeblood, that build relationships with those in town who have compatible values, compatible sense of calling. And now actually you're systematically working with the Holy Spirit, uh, and and watching the lifeblood flow, while being open to the idea that there's a lot of experimentation in this, right? So there's going to be something else I'd say in this is just expect that you're going to experiment with some new configurations, and some are going to take off, and others not so much. But this is, when we read the Bible, we see that God doesn't usually give people uh, easy things to do, or things that they're super comfortable already doing. God gives people tasks that stretch them to go where they haven't been before, and be faithful there, and that's really um, where we can go, and we can learn a lot from others who have done it, because chances are maybe your church hasn't gone from full-time to part-time, but probably others in your community have.
Mm-hmm.
um, and this is also a great opportunity for predominantly white congregations to learn from congregations that are not predominantly white, and that have in many cases had more experience with part-time or bivocational clergy, uh, and can really partner and learn how have you been making it work for these past few decades. Um, that's a that's a There's just so many good things that can come of this. I could ramble on, but I think you see the promise here, Dennis, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do, and I've seen it in my own practice. And it's funny. I did not bring up non-white churches, um, but that is having grown up in the Black church. I know that um, it's kind of has that's been basically their operation from time immemorial. Um, Especially back home in Michigan, there were pastors who both worked in the auto plants, or whether on the line, or in white collar positions, but then also pastored. So this is not unusual. And if you look at the totality of the church, it's just unusual in predominantly mainline and predominantly white congregations. But it's not impossible to switch to that model. It just takes some time.
Right, exactly. It's a more it is more of a transition for some of these churches that have had a different experience in recent generations, uh, but their churches likely had these models earlier in their history, and can really learn from their neighbors,
Hmm.
uh, and and what a great way to avail ourselves to the richness of the Holy Spirit's gifts. I mean, so much of this, I think, First Corinthians 12 is uh, a, uh, a perfect passage for this whole area. One, because it talks about having the that the Spirit's gifts are not all vested in the head; they're vested across the body, and so that means the laity are blessed with gifts of ministry too. And laity haven't always been taught to think that way, but you have it in this, and horizontally across congregations, like we're saying, the churches that are not predominantly white, they're and have more experience with this. That's all part of the body of Christ that is capable of blessing the rest of the body
Yep.
in a new way. That um, this is the right time for so many reasons to cultivate that particular horizontal learning. Um, I really want to see it happen. I want more structure. Sometimes the denominations say, "How can we support this? How can we be part of helping this?" That's one way that you can do it. You can convene settings where we do some ecumenical learning from those who have more experience with this. You can also lift up the examples and give a voice to those who are doing ministry in this way. Let that happen. Let that be seen at conferences and denominational meetings. Um, lift this up as a viable way of ministry that has its own challenges, but also its own blessings, and just allow it to flourish and make room for it. Too often, I attended a conference that was talking about church security issues, and this the congregation that they put in front to give the talk was the one that was head and shoulders wealthier than all the others in the room. And so they talked about having police detail on all six entrances and every Sunday morning, and having hidden cameras that were all over the place, kind of watching everybody's movement. And everybody's sitting there nodding and saying, well, that's nice, but we can't do that. And there are too many parallels in ministry education that are also uh, just unfeasible.
Yep.
So you need to lift up this the sleeping giant within the church, which is church is doing great ministry but getting very little recognition. uh, let's let's make more of that happen, and see the fruits that the Holy Spirit brings.
So, where can people find your book, which is Part Time Clergy is Enough? And if people just want to even get in contact with you, where can they find you?
Sure, yeah. So right, part time is plenty. Thriving without full time clergy is the book that you can find pretty much anywhere that books are sold. Amazon, Barnes and Noble, your local bookstore, they can all provide it. Um, you can find information about me and my work at gjeffreymacdonald.com. Uh, and so there's you can learn about my work there, and if you Google my byline, which is G. Jeffrey MacDonald, is the first initial G, and MacDonald is with the MAC spelling. You'll find things that I've written. I'm trying to put more of that coherently together so that you can see articles on this subject as I continue to write about it and speak about it, um, and find opportunities to lift up the what's happening on the landscape. There are many stories that are worth telling in this arena.
Well, uh, Jeffrey MacDonald, who is the author of Part Time is Plenty, thank you. This was a great conversation, and thanks so much for the time.
Yeah. Thank you, Dennis, for the honor. It's really been a treat to be part of this conversation.
All right. Take care.
All right.